at some point, certainly, we're all asked, well, which is the best argument you've yet come up against from the other side? And I think every one of us picks the fine-tuning one as the most intriguing.
The Goldilocks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Fine-tuning the 1 degree, well, 1 degree, 1 hair different to nothing. But even though it doesn't prove a designer, could all have happened without it, you have to spend time thinking about it.
Of all the arguments posed by defenders of the God hypothesis in recent years, it seems for some reason that the one that holds the most resonant persuasive power over atheists is the so-called fine-tuning argument, a type of teleological argument that's often quoted as being the best argument that exists in favour of God. Now, the fine-tuning argument has only really been a serious roadblock for us heretics since the advent of the science of cosmology, a recently youngish field of study. Cosmology is, loosely, an attempt to explain the origins of the endlessly perplexing universe in which we find ourselves. And in the last few centuries, humanity has borne witness to a myriad of revolutionary discoveries which, whilst some have lessened the instinctual human reflex of the invocation of a divine creator, for others have only strengthened it. Now, before we get our trousers off, I'd like to ensure that I'm not perpetuating any false excitement. If you're looking for a rebuttal to the so-called design argument, or by extension the watchmaker analogy, in relation to the complexity of life on Earth, I shan't be tackling that here. If, however, that is something you'd like to see as part of this series, your letting me know would not go unnoticed. Instead, today I wish to focus my efforts on the argument from the fine-tuning of the universe itself regarding cosmology and the universal conditions which govern the physics of all matter. So then, the argument goes as follows. There exist a number of physical constants that govern the universe, such as the rate of its expansion or the strength of gravity, that if altered by even an inconceivably small amount would mean that the universe would cease to exist. As an example, if the expansion rate of the universe were any faster, the universe would have initially flown apart so quickly as to disallow for the assembly of subatomic particles, and later atoms, and even later, you and me. If, conversely, it were any slower, then the universe would have collapsed under its own gravity. Alas, the expansion rate is in fact precisely the speed it needs to be to allow for the development of matter. Now, the instinctual reaction to this is generally the consideration of two possible explanations. Option A is that this occurred completely by chance and that we just got lucky, and option B is that there was some kind of intelligence behind the calibration of these constants. Now, admittedly, it does at first seem rather obvious that the proposition of chance is palpably absurd. However, it may console you to realize that this unlikelihood is comfortably recognized by most educated disbelievers, and that the options presented here in fact constitute a false dichotomy. That is to say, there are other explanations for the apparent fine-tuning. The third, often unspoken option to consider is that of physical necessity. In other words, we have to consider the possibility that there are some as of yet unidentified laws and universal properties which create a physical impossibility for the constants of the universe to vary from those which allow for its sustainment. The constants must have been that way, in other words. To elucidate, allow me to present a wonderfully convenient example, given that this has already been somewhat shown to be the case for at least one of the quoted constants. The specific example I'm speaking of is gravity. As you'll know if you paid even minimal attention in school, it was Sir Isaac Newton who first proposed gravity as an explanation for the orbit of celestial orbs in a publication called Principia Mathematica in the 17th century. For Newton, gravity was more of a concept than a physical quality of the universe, which he explained with reference to a mathematical inverse square law, which is simply an elegant formula that describes the strength of gravity. If an object moves 2 times further away, its gravity becomes 4 times weaker. If an object moves 4 times further away, its gravity becomes 16 times weaker because it's squared. Under a Newtonian understanding of gravity, it can be remarkably easy to credit some intelligent designer for the mathematical perfection of this expression, just as Newton was a man of God himself. However, 2 centuries later, gravitational theory experienced quite a shake-up from a modest Swiss patent office employee with a famously incredible imagination. When Albert Einstein published his understanding of gravity, and thanks to since collected evidence, the world was made aware of a fascinating fact: that gravity isn't just an arbitrary force, it's a physical quality of the universe. You see, Einstein's big idea was contrary to the belief that the universe is just empty space in which stuff happens. that space itself is a physical thing, a thing that can bend and warp and be affected by matter. The common analogy is to think of the universe as some kind of four-dimensional fabric. Similarly to how placing a bowling ball on a trampoline will cause other objects on the trampoline to fall towards it, objects in space warp the space around them, causing them to attract other objects, the effect that we call gravity. Suddenly, the mathematical perfection of gravity makes perfect sense. Of course, the force of gravity is a perfect inverse square law. It has to be due to the fact that gravity is just a symptom of the malleable fabric of space. It's not just an arbitrary value that could have in principle had any strength. It's a real, tangible, physical effect of space itself. And hey presto, the problem of fine-tuning disappears. The problem is, of course, that Einsteins don't come around all too often, and so it may be a long while before we can develop a similar understanding of the other governing constants of the universe. But remember that just because we don't have proof of the physical necessity of other constants, its mere plausibility at the very least removes the need for the conjuring up of some god or gods as an alternative explanation. To put it another way, let's inject some numbers. If you've seen my video response to Justin Brierley, and later my radio conversation with him, you'll probably remember his specific claim that if any of these universal constants were different by a factor of 1 in 10 to the 55, an unimaginably small factor, the universe could not exist. Again, this seems absolutely astonishing, and to make matters all but worse, this is actually roughly true. So how on earth could any atheist possibly account for this fine-tuning? It seems ludicrous. Well, the problem lies in the assumption that these constants are in fact finely tuned at all. Again, consider physical necessity. Yes, if you were to change any of these constants by a factor of 1 in 10 to the 55, you would cause a universal catastrophe. However, this doesn't mean that you actually can change these constants by a factor of 1 in 10 to the 55. There is therefore not necessarily a 1 in 10 to the 55 chance of the constants appearing as they are, just because that's the factor by which changing them would have an effect. And even if there were a billion different values these constants could have had in principle, you can't possibly claim that each of these possibilities had the same chance of occurring, because that would require a knowledge of potential outcomes which you and I simply do not have. In other words, it requires a significant assumption for one to be able to assert, as apologists so often do, that the chances of our universe existing are tiny. The omnipresent issue with this argument is assumptions such as this. We understandably perceive the universe to be perfectly tuned for us, when in fact the exact contrary is true. We are perfectly tuned for it. The person who claims that the Earth is perfectly located in the solar system is the same person who disregards the other planets that surround us, desolate of life. He is the same person that ignores the uncountable other solar systems and planets and fails to apply the simple logic of chance. If a blindfolded man were to walk into a room and aimlessly throw a dart, and you later discovered it to have landed precisely in the center of a 5-centimeter target, you may at first be amazed, as were the cave-dwelling apes who founded our species amazed at the wonder of the universe. If, however, upon closer investigation you then find a marker pen lying on the floor, and then notice that the target and dart are in a seemingly uncalculated random position on one of the walls, it's only logical to assume that you were first misled. The dart hit no target, the target was drawn around the dart. We have conclusively uncovered the marker pen of the universe through the cosmological and evolutionary sciences, and we have recently noticed our own uncalculated random position in an endlessly hostile universe. If, in other words, this universe is finely tuned for something, it takes an extraordinary leap of faith for any sound-minded individual to believe that that something is us. I've been Alex O'Connor, or Cosmic Skeptic. You can find me on social media here. I want to thank you for watching as always. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.